which originated in Europe during the late 18th century, and then it reached the peak during the early 19th century as well as mid 19th century. Now the question arises, why was the romantic movement or the romantic age, why did the romantic age occur? What happened? What was the literary condition? What was the cultural background that necessitated the evolution of romantic age or romantic criticism? So when in the late 18th century, romantic spirit was aroused, Romanticism was considered as a literary, artistic, and intellectual movement, the reason being it arose as a reaction against the rationalism of the neoclassical age. The rationalism, the enlightenment, and the strict forms, the emphasis on the form, the stress on the technique by the poets of neoclassical age. Neoclassical age poets, who are they? Dryden and Pope. So Romanticism arose or occurred as a reaction against the strict forms, the rigid technique adopted by the neoclassical poets, the spirit of rationalism, the spirit of enlightenment, which was practiced during the neoclassical age. And when Romanticism occurred in Europe, it put emphasis on emotion over reason. But the poets in the neoclassical age, they were giving emphasis on reason and intellect, rationality. But the romantic people or the writers in the romantic age, they put emphasis on emotion, imagination, passion, thought, aberration, etc. But in the neoclassical age, it was not the fact. In the neoclassical age, they were putting emphasis on reason, rationality, intellect, enlightenment, rigidity of form, rigidity of technique, and they were negligent of the content. They never gave that much. They never gave that much of emphasis on the content. So during the neoclassical age, the content was totally neglected. But the romantic age brought about a new thrust on emotion, imagination, and individual freedom. And they also developed their attachment to nature, to supernatural elements, to the folklore, and to the inner world of human spirit. So the romantic writers or the romantic poets not only gave emphasis on emotion and imagination, individual freedom, along with that, they showed their attachment, their love for nature. They celebrated nature. They also wrote on supernatural things. The element of supernaturalism was noticed in the writings of romantic poets. The romantic poets also gave emphasis on art, architecture. Greek art was patronized by the romantic poets, which we otherwise call Hellenism. And they also gave emphasis on the folklore. The romantic poets were very much empathetic, and they analyzed, discussed, and focused on the inner world of human spirit. What is the inner world of human spirit? And they make a distinction between body and spirit, or mind and body. So during the Romantic Age, which occurred in the last part of 18th century and became very popular during the entire 19th century in Europe, especially in England, they gave emphasis on emotion and imagination. This is very important, you should remember it. The main feature, the main salient feature of Romanticism is to give emphasis on emotion and imagination. They also brought into focus the feelings, the thoughts, the passions, and they discussed or they gave more emphasis on emotion, imagination, thought, idea, passion. But they did not give that much of priority to logic and reason. They never gave that much of priority to logic and reason. Rather, they gave priority to emotion, imagination, thought, feeling, idea, passion, aberration, you know, individual freedom, love for nature, love for the inner world of human spirit, love for independence, love for folklore, love for art and architecture. So they loved nature very deeply. Nature was not only a scenery for them, a landscape for them, a picturesque, beautiful scenery for them, but nature had a living presence. They discovered the element of spiritualism in nature. They also found nature to be highly inspiring, highly encouraging. And if you remember Wordsworth's statement in the Tinternabbe, his famous poem Tinternabbe, William Wordsworth, the pioneer of the Romantic Revival movement, said, nature is not only my nurse, guide, guardian, and mother of all my soul, but nature is the nurse, guide, guardian, and mother of all my moral being. So from this you can imagine the type of attachment Wordsworth had towards nature. For Wordsworth, nature is everything. And he can't view human society in the absence of nature. He was the first poet to discover a keen affinity between nature and human civilization or human society. Nature was indispensable to human society. In the writings of Romantic poets, we notice the elements of pantheism. From pantheism, we come across three areas: pantheism, panentheism, and panpsychism. Wordsworth put his emphasis on the element of pantheism because Wordsworth was a poet who discovered the element of divinity or the divine presence behind every animate and inanimate being. Whatever animate and inanimate beings he came across in the world, he attached or attributed everything to nature. And in nature, he said, there is divine presence. In nature, there is animate being, there is inanimate being, or there are animate beings, there are inanimate beings. And behind those animate and inanimate beings, there is the effect or there is the presence of divinity. So what is the meaning of pantheism? The meaning of pantheism is to discover divine presence behind every animate and inanimate object in this world. Remember and note it down. Pantheism, pantheism. So that was Wordsworth. So Wordsworth talked about pantheism. Wordsworth discovered the element of divinity, the spiritual element behind every inanimate and animate object, and that is the temperament, or that is the attachment of Wordsworth towards nature. Wordsworth called nature as the nurse, guide, guardian of his soul and of all his moral being. He said, whatever I have learned, whatever I have acquired in my life, whatever wisdom, whatever knowledge, whatever awareness I have, everything I owe to nature. If there were no nature, I would not have been what I am today. It means he attaches all importance to nature. He says, divine being is the only thing which regulates all the activities in this world, and especially, all the living beings, all the non-living beings, all the animate objects, all the inanimate objects are regulated in this world by the divine presence. So divine presence is very important, and without divine presence nothing is possible. So nature is everything for human being, and there is a keen relationship, close, cordial, keen relationship between man on the one hand and nature on the other hand. Wordsworth always finds that nature has been very helpful to him in all the activities that he carries out in his life. Maybe creative activities, maybe constructive activities, maybe socio-political activities, maybe cultural activities. So everywhere he notices the effect of nature. And nature for him is not only the nurse, guide, and guardian of his soul, but of all his moral being. So he has never found anything wanting in his life, and he says, nature has given me a blessed mood, a blissful life, a life full of blessings, and a sublime world. Most of the times I used to have, sweet sensations. So everything is possible because of nature. It is nature which has been so very benign, which has been so very compassionate, which has been so very generous to me. So Wordsworth called nature, addressed nature as a teacher, as a preceptor, as a mentor, as an educator, as a preacher, and as a guide, as a guardian, as a friend, as a philosopher. So for Wordsworth, nature is everything. So love of nature is uppermost among the poets of Romantic age, and their poetry is littered with landscapes of nature, scenic and picturesque beauty of nature, portrayal of nature. Then another characteristic feature of Romantic poetry is the focus on individual freedom. The Romantic poets, they always championed and glorified the personal freedom. They talked about individuality, they talked about dreams, desires, thoughts, fruition, accomplishment, contentment, fulfillment, pursuit, efforts, you know, targets. So they confine themselves to the improvement of an individual, the all round improvement of an individual, personal, social, familial, psychological, spiritual improvement of an individual. The Romantic poets also wanted the individual growth should be emphasized, and with the growth of all the individuals, social growth is possible. If you want social growth, you cannot ignore individual growth, because all the individuals together, they form the society. So in the Romantic poetry, you find the glorification of personal freedom, individuality, personal likes and dislikes, joys and jubilance, sorrows and sufferings, trials and tribulations, enigmas and perplexities, agonies and anguishes, thrills and excitements, adventures and enterprises, enterprising ability, all these things are highlighted. They used to glorify the past, because in Romantic poetry we come across their love for medievalism. Their previous age is the medieval age, and they used to show tremendous interest in the folklore of medieval age, in the myth and legend of the medieval age, in the art and architecture of the medieval age. So medieval age was very important for the Romantic poets. Along with that, they used to show their love for chivalry, courage, strength, vivacity, adventure, enterprising ability, dynamism, dashing nature, and they also revived the Gothic elements. Gothic elements highlighting horror and exotic elements in their poetry. Apart from these things, there is another characteristic feature in the Romantic poetry which is very explicitly found. What is that? That is their fascination with the supernatural, the Gothic horror, the exotic things, the myths, the legends, etc. If you go through Coleridge's poem, The Rime of Ancient Mariner, you come across these elements. The elements of the exotic, the elements of the horror, the supernatural elements, etc. So, all the Romantic poets, they together put emphasis on nature, they glorified nature, they glorified medieval folklore, medieval culture, medieval art, architecture, myth, legend, folklore, etc. And along with that, they focused on chivalry, they highlighted courage, strength, vivacity, enterprise, adventure, etc. in their poetry. They also gave emphasis on myth and legend, gothic horror, exotic elements, elements of the remote, elements of the unknown. All those things were highlighted. And we come across all those elements in the poem of Coleridge, Rhyme of Ancient Mariner. In the Romantic poetry, we also come across another feature, a wonderful feature which is not found with the neoclassical poets or the Augustan poets. What is that? That is their focus on rural life. What did the neoclassical poets do? The neoclassical poets highlighted the problems and issues related to the urban population. But here in Romantic poetry, we find the thrust is given on the rural population. What are the liabilities of the rural people? What are their problems? What kind of stressful life they have been leading? How their life is full of struggle and strife, full of challenges, poverty, malnutrition. They are haunted by poverty and malnutrition. All those things are portrayed in Romantic poetry. So whatever was highlighted in Romantic poetry by Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Keats and Coleridge were ignored totally by their predecessors such as John Dryden and Alexander Pope, who are called the neoclassical poets. The Romantic poets, they were opposed to industrialization and urban culture. They never liked industrialization. Industrialization started in 1760 and it continued up to 1840. Then it has been continuing till today. So industrialization brought about a large scale unemployment. People got unemployed in a large scale. So the Romantic poets never liked industrialization. And along with that, they also were not happy with the urban, lifestyle. Rather, they were very much happy with the rural lifestyle, rustic lifestyle, the life full of challenges, the life full of, struggle, strife, and the people, how they used to lead a very, miserable life amid poverty, malnutrition, wants, shortcomings, inadequacies. So every day is a challenging day for these people. Wordsworth always started to focus on the dignity and simplicity of the peasants in rural areas. It is Wordsworth who used to be very empathetic, very compassionate, very sympathetic, very generous towards the poor peasants of the rural area. He realized their problems, he realized their shortcomings, he realized their financial difficulties and how they have been managing their lives in the absence of, good economic condition. Their economic condition is very backward. In this connection, you may have a look at Marxist philosophy. What did Karl Marx say in his famous book Das Kapital, or even his other book Communist Manifesto? He spoke about two classes. He said there is class distinction in society. And there are two classes. One is the rich class, the other is the poor class. One is the bourgeois, the other is the proletariat. And as long as this economic difference is there, we cannot have development. The development of the country shall be hampered, shall be affected if there is economic disparity among the people. So he suggested that there should be equitable distribution of national wealth among all categories of people. So it was Wordsworth who always realized and depicted, described the stressful life, the challenging life of the rural peasants. Then we come across in their poetry another feature, that is they want to break away with the tradition. They don't want to, succumb to or abide by the tradition. What do? They want to break away from the classical rules of form and style. What is the classical rule of form? In the previous age, in the neoclassical age, the two poets, Dryden and Pope, they were emphasizing on the form. What form they were writing poetry? They were writing poetry through heroic couplets. What is heroic couplet? Heroic couplet is a couplet comprising two lines, and each line possesses 10 syllables, 5 meters and 10 syllables, which are called iambic pentameters. So each line is a iambic pentameter. Yes, Shilpa, you have any problem? Shilpa Sharma?
Yes, sir, I have a question.
Yeah, most welcome. You can ask your question.
Sir, can you describe again about chivalry in the this features of romanticism?
Romanticism.
Yeah.
You joined late or what?
Yeah, sir, I joined late.
Okay, never mind. I will. So let me start. Giving a description of the Romanticism. Romanticism started as an artistic, literary, and intellectual movement. Try to remember. Romanticism started as a reaction in form of a literary, artistic, and intellectual movement against the neoclassical tradition. What was the neoclassical tradition? The neoclassical tradition was there was rigidity of form, style, and they were putting their focus on urban life. They never bothered about the rural life. So the romantic poets, when they appeared in the last part of 18th century and continued till the entire 19th century, or say middle part of 19th century, towards the last part of 19th century, the Victorian poets came. The romantic poets continued up to mid 19th century, middle part of 19th century, and during that period they put their focus or put their thrust on emotion and imagination. But the neoclassical poets, they were putting their thrust on reason and intellect. Romantic poets put emphasis on emotion, imagination, thought, ideas, passions, aberrations, individual freedom, liberty, love of folklore, love of myth, legend, medieval symbols, medieval culture. So Romantic poets put their emphasis on medieval myth, medieval legend, medieval folklore, Gothic elements. They also suggested or portrayed in their poetry. And apart from that, they were in love with nature. If you remember Wordsworth's Tinternabe, in that poem he has described that nature is not only my mother, guide, and guardian of all my soul, but nature is the mother, guide, and guardian of all my moral being. So this kind of allegiance Wordsworth had towards nature. So all the romantic poets, for that matter, they had the spirit of pantheism. What is pantheism? Pantheism means to discover the element of divinity behind every animate and inanimate object. It was Wordsworth who felt that behind every animate and inanimate object there is divinity, there is spiritual blessing, there is the hand of the creator, there is hand of God. The divine hand is there, otherwise this world would not have been possible. So they showed their love for beautiful landscapes, for mountains, for fountains, river, rivulets, hills, hillocks, birds, scenery, picturesque beauty. All those things were liked by romantic people, and they began to describe it in their poetry. So this is how romantic poetry is different from the neoclassical poetry. And romantic poets, they started writing as a reaction against the neoclassical tradition, who gave emphasis to reason and intellect. Try to understand the difference. The neoclassical poets emphasized on reason and intellect, rationality, enlightenment, but romantic poets emphasized on emotion, imagination, thought, passion, aberration, etc. And apart from that, the romantic poets, they had a kind of liking for the medieval folklore, Gothic elements, myths, legends, and they also were in love with the past. They always glorified the past in their poetry. So the basic difference between neoclassical poets and romantic poets is that the neoclassical poets, they were putting their emphasis or focusing on urban lifestyle, whereas the romantic poets highlighted the rural lifestyle. A very great difference, most distinct difference, noticeable difference. And not only that, they broke away from the tradition. Tradition of what? Tradition of form. What kind of form? They were writing through heroic couplets. Heroic couplet I described to you, I told you, is a couplet or two lines comprising iambic pentameters. An iamb is a short syllable followed by a long syllable. Penta means 5, meter means 2 syllables. So it means each line comprised 10 syllables. Dryden and Pope, they always made sure that each line of their poetry should consist of 10 syllables. When they gave so much of emphasis on form, obviously the content was neglected. But in romantic poetry, the content was safeguarded. Their main thrust was content. They never give any emphasis. They never gave any emphasis to form or technique. Apart from that, they also tried to champion individual independence. They wanted that independence of the individual is uppermost. If individual freedom is ensured, there will be social growth and literature will be at its peak. So they glorified the past, they highlighted the medieval elements like myths, legends, folklore, Gothic elements, horror, etc. in their poetry, and they broke away from the traditional pattern of writing in heroic couplets. They put their emphasis on rural lifestyle. They wanted to show how the peasants in the rural areas are having a stressful life, are having enough of challenges to make both the ends meet, how they are living in penury, how they are living amid poverty, malnutrition. All those things were highlighted. But the neoclassical poets, they never bother about the rural people. They only focused on urban lifestyle. That is why their poetry was called coffee house poetry. And moreover, they were writing satires. They never wrote anything relating to society, anything relating to the joys and jubilance, to the trials and tribulations of the common man. Their language was also a bit difficult to understand. But here, in the poetry of Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Keats, and Coleridge, we find wonderful, simple, colloquial, understandable, intelligible, lucid language. Every reader can understand that kind of language. There was no sonority, there was no difficulty, there was no problem in understanding the meaning of romantic poetry or meaning of the language of romantic poetry. So this is the basic difference, and romanticism, the salient features of romanticism. Silpa, are you clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we'll proceed. The romantic poets started a kind of rebellion, a kind of reaction and agitation against the rules, against the authority. They never gave any importance to the rules set by the neoclassical poets. Rules, as I told you, heroic couplet, satire, urban lifestyle, all those things they ignored. Romantic poets had their own rules. What kind of rule? Love for nature, element of pantheism. There is divine presence behind every natural object. Every animate and inanimate object is regulated by the divinity. The portrayal of landscapes, scenic and picturesque beauty, the flowing fountain, the wonderful mountain, the lovely sky, the wonderful weather, all those things are the basic areas on which they began to write. The romantic poets attached much importance to originality and spontaneity. They were extremely original. They never borrowed anything from anybody. The romantic poets put emphasis on originality and spontaneity. You know how poetry is defined by William Wordsworth? William Wordsworth defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. What is spontaneous overflow? I had given you the example of a bucket. Let me remind you, Wordsworth said, there is spontaneity in writing poetry. You can't become a poet unless you have this spontaneous expression. And the feelings, whatever feelings you have gathered, they should overflow spontaneously. No one should make any effort. Effortlessly, easily, spontaneously, they should overflow. How is it possible? Let's suppose there is a bucket or a container. You start pouring water into the container. Go on pouring till it is full. It is full to the brim. Still you pour, don't stop. When you start pouring water incessantly, despite the fact that the container is filled up or the bucket is filled up, and you are not stopping pouring water, what happens? Water overflows. Similarly, human brain or human mind has a limited space. And when that limited space is filled up with powerful feelings, not ordinary feelings, remember, powerful feelings, you are coming across 101 experiences, 101 sights, but all the sights, they don't make a mark in your mind. For example, while going on the road, you come across a poor peasant, is tilling the land, plowing the land under the hot sun. Then you move ahead. You find a dead body is taken. People are chanting Ram Naam Satya Hai, Hari Naam Satya Hai. Then you move ahead. You find a young boy and girl. They are talking under the gulmohar tree, having romance. You move ahead. A few industrial workers, they are launching agitation, giving slogan against the owner, factory owner. So such type of experiences you go on gathering over the days. After you go on gathering over the days such type of experiences, a time comes when the space of your mind is filled up. When the space of your mind is filled up, at that time you don't stop. You go on gathering experience. What happens? At that time, the experience starts overflowing. And when the experience starts overflowing, you sit down in a calm, quiet, serene, tranquil, placid, undisturbed atmosphere. Sit down there with a pen and paper and you start recollecting, recounting, reminiscing, remembering, retrieving the feelings, the experiences. When you reminisce those feelings come to you like the picture of a kaleidoscope or a bioscope, and you go on jotting down. Whatever you jot down, that is your poetry. So, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. The powerful feelings began to overflow when the mind's space is filled up. Then you sat down in a calm and quiet place. You recovered those feelings, recollected those feelings, recounted those feelings, put them together, and while putting them together, you produced poetry. So that is the wonderful definition and most acceptable and popular definition of Wordsworth on poetry. So, the romantic people or the romantic poets gave emphasis on spontaneity, spontaneity of expression, and freedom of expression. They put emphasis on originality. The writing should be original. The writing should be spontaneous. It should not be influenced by any outside factor. Then we come across another feature, and that is the revolutionary spirit. You will notice the element of the revolutionary spirit in the minds of the romantic poets. The romantic poets are very revolutionary by nature. What do? They want democratic right, they want democratic spirit, revolutionary spirit, because the French Revolution, which occurred in 1789, it influenced the romantic writers very much. The romantic poets believed that the three virtues pioneered or taught by the French Revolution are liberty, equality, and fraternity. So the Romantic poets also believed in these three virtues everyone should practice. Each one of us and every poet should practice the element of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which are very important in human life. We also come across another feature. They are very much soft towards the oppressed, neglected, isolated, sidelined section, marginalized section in the society. They always stood by the poor people. They always talked about the poor people. They never behaved in a one sided manner. They were never biased. Rather, they had individual freedom, they had their own choice, and they wanted to sympathize with the oppressed section of people, marginalized section of people, the poverty stricken section of people. And they also began to celebrate their freedom. The Romantic poets, they wanted to gather experience, seek experience, which was beyond human comprehension. And they always tried to weave around a sublime atmosphere of sublimity. That sublime atmosphere which no one can imagine. They wanted to discover the sublime aspect in nature as well as in the world around them. So their experience was awe-inspiring. Their experience was very encouraging. And their experience was beyond human comprehension. They always wanted to discover the sublime element in nature. Because remember, while visiting River I, WYE, Wordsworth had visited river bank I, 5 years back. At that time, he was not able to, discover the real beauty of the river bank or the river. After a gap of 5 years, he visited the place again. And while visiting the place, he realized he had missed so many things. It's such a brilliant, wonderful, awe-inspiring place. I had totally ignored it. How come I ignored it? Now I find a sweet sensation in my heart. I find myself in a blessed mood. I find myself surrounded by a sublime atmosphere. So, the sublime atmosphere, the sweet sensation, and the blessed mood were discovered by Wordsworth while visiting Riverbank Eye after a gap of 5 years. So the element of sublimity is always there in their poetry, and they try to find out the element of sublimity in nature. They use very simple language, lucid language, colloquial language, intelligible language, understandable language, common language, which doesn't create any difficulty for any common reader with workable knowledge in English. So, with a deep emotional tone, they use the colloquial language of a common man and they write their poetry. There is flexibility in their writing style. They adopt narrative techniques. They never stick to any rigid form like the neoclassical poets. So, overall, we find Romanticism is nothing but Romanticism in literature is nothing but a literature which deals with passion, imagination, emotion, nature, individual freedom, and rural beauty. Okay, so this is what is called the introduction on the Romanticism or the definition of Romanticism and its salient features. We'll now switch over to the preface to lyrical ballads of William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballads was written in the year 1800. Lyrical ballads itself was written in 1798 by two persons, two friends, Wordsworth and Coleridge. But the preface was written 2 years later, that is in 1800. And this preface to lyrical ballads is a very important, creation, iconic creation, I should say, which is believed to be the manifesto of English Romanticism. If anybody asks you, what do you find in Romanticism? You immediately point your finger at the preface to lyrical ballads. In the preface to lyrical ballads, Wordsworth says that the primary goal of poetry is to provide pleasure, entertainment, delight, contentment, satisfaction, accomplishment, joy. Through what? Through truth. So Wordsworth said, the primary goal of poetry is to provide pleasure through truth. And poetry should stir emotions and reflect genuine feelings among the readers. Genuine feelings for reading poetry. Poetry should be written in such a manner so that it will stir the hearts of the readers and generate a sense of appreciation among the readers for poetry. In the preface to lyrical ballads, he also highlighted on the choice of the subject. What all subjects should be chosen by the poet? what kind of subject he should choose? He should choose very ordinary and common things. Especially, he should choose incidents and situations from ordinary and common life, from people living in rural area, leading a rustic life, leading an humble life. What is their struggle? What is their challenge? What are their wants? What are their shortcomings? All these things should be highlighted. So, rustic life, they wanted to highlight in their poetry because the readers of London, readers of England, they were dissatisfied with the urban lifestyle portrayed by the neoclassical poets in their poetry. They wanted something new. They wanted something original. And that original thing came from the Romantic poets. The Romantic poets considered the rustic life to be the favorite theme. Why did they focus on the rustic life? They focused on rustic life because they thought if the rustic life is closer to nature, if rustic life is closer to nature, then the emotions, passions, and expressions of people in the rustic area are more genuine and universal. Look at the logic. The Romantic poets thought the rustic life is closer to nature. And the Romantic poets, they love nature, worship nature, they are pantheists. Since rustic life is close to nature, they thought that the passions, emotions, ideas, thoughts, aberrations of these people, these common and ordinary people, are portrayed in their poetry with genuine interest. The feelings are genuine. Feelings are not mechanical. Because he said, the poetry expresses emotions through truth. Poetry provides pleasure, provides emotional background through truth. So that is how he said, a rural life, rural people, rustic people are closer to nature. When they are closer to nature, they have genuine and universal feeling. Their feelings are genuine. Their feelings are not mechanical, not imaginary or fake. That is why they dealt with the rustic life. Then, while going to comment on the language of poetry, first of all, he talked about the purpose of poetry. What should be the purpose of poetry? Try to understand. Refers to lyrical ballads, focuses on these aspects of writing poetry. First of all, Wordsworth described what is the purpose of poetry. The purpose of poetry is to provide pleasure through truth. Then, secondly, he tried to describe the choice of the subject matter. Then he said the subject matter should come from common life, rural life, rustic life, the life that is closer to nature. So he said The incidents and situations from rustic life should be portrayed. Then he said, what should be the language of poetry? First is purpose of poetry, second is choice of subject, third is language of poetry. What language one poet is supposed to use in his poetry? Wordsworth said, the language of poetry should be very simple. Simple language, colloquial language, conversational language, lucid language, approachable, accessible language should be used by the poets in their poetry. He rejected the decorative, high-flown poetic diction. Diction means language. Very sonorous, high-flown, resonant language should be avoided. And it should be very much approachable, accessible, permissible, enjoyable, colloquial, conversational, intelligible, understandable language. So that a reader is interested, a reader is motivated to read that poetry. But look at the other side. If the language of poetry is difficult, obviously no one would like to read it. They will throw it like a hot potato. Nobody would like to study it. If it is very approachable, intelligible, simple, lucid, colloquial, conversational, then people will be interested to read it. And he said, it should be the language of the common man, the ordinary man. As I told you, the colloquial language, the language used by the common man in their daily life. Every day, whatever language they have been using, poetry should use that kind of language. Then he says, the role of a poet. What should be the role of a poet? A poet is obviously having greater sensibility, fertile imagination, and the ability to express his emotion. Because you must be knowing what is the difference between a common man, an ordinary man, and a poet or a creative man. A poet or a creative man has organic sensibility. But an ordinary man has the common sensibility, the ordinary sensibility. So what is ordinary sensibility and what is organic sensibility? Organic sensibility is that sensibility in which a poet is able to observe a piece of object, a natural landscape, a picturesque scenery by using his five senses: touch, taste, smell, sight, hearing. When he is appreciating nature, when he is enjoying the flora and fauna, at that time he should be in a position to use five senses, five of his senses together at a time, in tandem, so that his enjoyment is proper. And at that time he finds, look, all my five senses are engaged to enjoy the beautiful scenery. So that is a poet. That is the difference between an ordinary man and a poet. An ordinary man has ordinary sensibility. A poet has organic sensibility. A poet is in a position to feel things intensely and communicate universal truths through personal feelings. What does a poet do? A poet used to feel things intensely. He doesn't feel things lightly. He feels things seriously. And he feels intensely and communicates universal truths. He doesn't communicate something which is applicable in some places, which is not applicable in other places. No. Whatever he reveals, whatever he portrays, whatever he writes, those things are applicable everywhere. The poet has the ability to recreate reality, and he has the ability to color it with the imagination. And he made an attempt to define poetic diction. You may write down the definition of poetic diction given by Wordsworth. He said, a poet should choose incidents and situations from ordinary and common life and throw a color of imagination in such a manner so as to make the ordinary things extraordinary and common things uncommon. This is the role of a poet and the poetic diction that Wordsworth talked about. And Wordsworth's definition of poetry, we have already discussed. He defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility, which means that poetry originates from intense emotion, intensity and depth of emotion. But it is refined by reflection, imagination, intellect. About function of poetry, in the preface to Lyrical Ballads, Wordsworth said, poetry brings man closer to nature. Poetry brings man closer to nature, closer to society. In other words, poetry is a kind of bridge. Poetry is a kind of rapport. Poetry is a kind of go-between, a kind of connection between human civilization, human society, and nature. And Wordsworth viewed poetry as a vital thing that a human being needs. It is a vital human need. Poetry is the absolute need of a human being. It is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Poetry refines human emotions. According to Wordsworth, poetry brings about refinement of human emotions. It promotes human sympathy and cultivates moral sensibility. Now, poetry brings about a relation between man and nature serves as a perennial source of inspiration for the poet. If the poet doesn't get inspiration from anywhere, he falls back on nature. And there is vast repertoire of resources in the lap of nature, which a poet can gather and portray it in his poetry. Wordsworth believes that communion with nature brings about the development of heart and mind. And if your mind is developed, your heart is fulfilled, you don't have any problem, you live in a state of happiness, in a state of eternal happiness. So, poetry is the source of bringing about eternal happiness in human life. So, Preface to Lyrical Ballads is viewed as a wonderful treatise, as a wonderful manifesto on poetry, and it sets out the revolutionary ideas of Wordsworth that poetry should deal with simple rustic life. Poet should show his allegiance to nature. Poetry should give importance to emotion and imagination, and it should be a means of moral wisdom. So naturally, this is a wonderful, document, wonderful treatise for all time to come. Next, we'll switch over to biography and literaria of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Biography and literaria, which was written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the Romantic critic. He talked about various aspects of literature, various aspects of imagination. He divided imagination into two parts or two types. One is primary imagination, the other is secondary imagination. Then he brought about a distinction between fancy and imagination. Biography and Literaria was written in 1817 by Coleridge. This Biographia Literaria is a major work of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And this Biographia Literaria is viewed as partly autobiographical and partly philosophical criticism. So the Biographia Literaria written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge is partly autobiographical and partly philosophical. It had two volumes. It was written in 1817. And at the time of writing, Coleridge wanted to present it as a literary autobiography. And there he has made attempts to explain or to describe about his development and growth as a poet, as a critic, as a thinker. But while writing about his own things, about his own, career as a poet, career as a critic, his development as a thinker, it became a very complex text. And in the process, he made a blending of his personal narrative with that of German philosophy and German literary theory. He wanted to originally present it as his own autobiography, his own growth as a poet, growth as a critic, growth as a thinker, but later on he mixed it with German philosophy. And literary theory. So here in Biographia and Literaria, we find how Coleridge grew up. In his childhood, he recounts how did he gather his early education, what kind of reading habit he had, what kind of friends he had relationship with in school and college, what was the influence of the friends on him. Then he discussed his love for poetry. He made some exposure about his love for poetry, his association with Wordsworth, and what kind of role did he take in writing the lyrical ballads. It was a joint venture. You know, the lyrical ballads was written by two poets, William Wordsworth and Coleridge. Both of them jointly prepared this project. So in Biographia Literaria, Coleridge has described about that, under what circumstance both of them prepared the joint project, joint venture, lyrical ballads. Then Coleridge also makes an attempt to bring out a distinction between poetry and poetic genius. He says, okay, when Wordsworth was making his views, projecting his views or presenting his views in the preface to lyrical ballads, Wordsworth talked about the diction of poetry or the language of poetry. But Coleridge argues that poetic language should not be confined to rustic language, but it should be a heightened expression, an imaginative expression. So there he had some differences with Wordsworth, and he commented that whatever Wordsworth says about the language of poetry, I don't agree. Although both of them are very close friends, Coleridge did not agree with Wordsworth when Wordsworth said that the language of poetry should be the language of the rustic speech or the ordinary people living in the rural area, or the colloquial language used by the ordinary people living in the rural area. Then he made his comments, made his observations on imagination and fancy. And imagination and fancy, his comments or his description, his views on imagination and fancy constitutes the central philosophical point of Biographia Literaria. He talks about the philosophers like Kant, Schelling, the German philosophers, and he says imagination is of two types. One is primary imagination and the other is secondary imagination. According to Coleridge, primary imagination is universal and it is unconscious, a repetition of God's act of creation in the human mind. So he believed that primary imagination is universal, primary imagination is unconscious, and primary imagination is a repetition of the act of creation by God. On the other hand, according to Coleridge, secondary imagination is conscious and creative power, and it transforms the reality. So primary imagination is universal and unconscious. Secondary imagination is conscious and creative power of the poet. In other words, secondary imagination is personal, primary imagination is universal, secondary imagination is conscious, primary imagination is unconscious. Secondary imagination is shaped by the poet, primary imagination is shaped by the act of creator or God. Then he talks about fancy. Fancy is a mechanical associative faculty that deals with the external arrangement, the fixity. Fancy is inferior to imagination. Fancy is a mechanical faculty which deals with external arrangements. So fancy is not superior to imagination, rather it is inferior to imagination. Coleridge, in his biography and literaria, he made a few comments on Wordsworth. He admired Wordsworth's poetic genius, but at the same time, he criticized him for overutilizing or overgeneralizing the use of rustic language. He said, Wordsworth is a wonderful poet. There is no doubt about it. He is an outstanding poet, renowned poet, a great poetic genius. But at the same time, I can't accept his overemphasis on rustic language. He should not have said that the language of poetry should be the language used by the rustic people. Then he said, poetic diction should elevate language. He appreciated Wordsworth's views on poetic diction and he said it should have the power, poetic diction should have the power to elevate the language without artificiality. There should not be any artificiality in the language of poetry and it should elevate the language. It should have the ability to elevate the language. That is what Coleridge has said. At the same time, while talking about elevating the language, poetic diction has the ability to elevate the poetic language. At the same time, he says, Milton and Shakespeare, they had the powerful poetic diction, and they were in a position to elevate the language. Coleridge put emphasis on the organic unity in poetry. He always wanted that there should be unity, organic unity in poetry, and poetry is like a living being. A work of art should grow like a living being. It should grow like an organism with all parts contributing to the whole. However, in that biography and literaria, he also made discussions on metaphysics, psychology, theology, idealism, etc. Mostly he discussed the philosophy of Kant, philosophy of Schelling. Coleridge made the struggle to reconcile reason and faith with imagination. So he said, poetry comprises the best words in the best order. Coleridge viewed poetry as synthesizing and harmonizing the best words in best order. He said imagination is divine and creative power. Imagination is superior to fancy. Every art has an organic growth, has an organic structure. Art is never mechanical. Art is organic. And criticism must be both philosophical and creative as well. He said the criticism should not be based on bias or prejudice. Criticism should be fair, it should be impartial, it should be objective, it should be dispassionate, it should be detached. It's not that you should be very partial about a writer. Criticism should not be judgmental, it should be ethical. Coleridge positions himself as a poet as well as a critic, bridging the Romantic literature and German philosophy. He brought Romantic literature closer to German philosophy because he was very fond of the philosophy of Immanuel Kant and Schelling of Germany. So, as a whole, if you look at Biographia Literaria, you find it is the best romantic literary theory. If refers to lyrical ballads, is the manifesto of romantic poetry, romantic criticism. Biographia Literaria is the romantic literary theory of the 19th century. Biographia Literaria introduced the famous theory of imagination versus fancy. It provided one of the earliest philosophical defenses of romantic poetry. It is a cornerstone of English literary criticism. It's a wonderful document that everyone loves to read, and it makes clear what is the essence of poetry, what is the importance of poetry, what is the difference between fancy and imagination, how primary imagination is universal, secondary imagination is personal, how primary imagination is unconscious, secondary imagination is conscious and creative. So it is the secondary imagination which regulates and motivates the poet to write something. So this is how Biographia Literaria is a very wonderful document which everyone looks forward to preserve and read. We will now switch over to Defense of Poetry by Percy B.C. Shelley. So here we find three testaments, three iconic you know treatises. One is Preface to Lyrical Ballads under Romantic Criticism category, Preface to Lyrical Ballads, Biographia Literaria, and Defense of Poetry. Defense of Poetry was written by Shelley, and it was written in 1821, but it took a lot of time to be published. It was completed in 1821, but it was published in 1840.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Sorry? Did someone say something? Okay.
Jadumani said something.
Sumit,
Yes,
you have any question?
sir. I have a question related the assignment. Related to the assignment part.
You are late to the assignment part. I couldn't get you.
Like why when we need to submit the assignment and on what email?
No, about assignment, I have no information. You may contact RC Bhubaneswar.
Huh?
If you ask me anything about your teaching and class, I will be able to explain to you. But about assignment and test, all those things, I don't know. You ask, contact with RC Bhubaneswar or mail them. Okay, Sumit.
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Sir, this is module 2, right? In the book.
No, this is your, block.
Yes.
This is your, I think, third block.
Yes.
In
Sir.
the third block, you have different units. In the
Yes.
third block, you have 4 units.
Yes.
First is romanticism, the concept and definition.
Mhm.
Second unit is preface to lyrical ballads.
Yes, sir.
Third unit is biographia literaria, and fourth unit is defense of poetry. This is about block 3.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So every block, there are 8 blocks. We'll
Mm.
be covering 8 blocks in literary criticism and theory.
Mm.
So each block has different units. This block has 4 units.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Mm.
So this is the last unit we are going to study.
Yes.
Defense of Poetry by Percy B.C. Shelley.
Yes.
So this Defense of Poetry was written in 1821, I tell you,
Yes.
and it was published late, quite late, very late. It was published in the year 1840. Actually, this was written, it was in response to Thomas Love Pickup, who wrote an essay, The 4 Ages of Poetry. There was a writer in the Romantic Age whose name is Thomas Love Peacock, who wrote an essay, 4 Ages of Poetry. There, he argued that poetry was an outdated art from which little use in a practical scientific age. Means he defamed poetry, blamed poetry, condemned poetry. He depreciated poetry, denigrated poetry.
In 1840,
In 1821, in 1820.
1820.
In 1820, there was a writer, Sumit, try to understand. There was a writer whose name is Thomas Love Peacock. Okay.
Okay.
Thomas Love Peacock wrote an article, an essay on poetry.
Mm-hmm.
The title of the essay was The 4 Ages of Poetry, which
Okay.
was written in 1820. And there he criticized poetry. He said that poetry is meaningless, useless. Poetry is irrelevant.
कैसे हैं आप लोग?
But I can agree with his thoughts. Like if you will ask me in
No, that is
2025.
different. But here, our problem is whatever Shelley has written, that is the matter of discussion. He is getting.
Yeah.
If you say poetry is irrelevant, there is no problem. But at the same time, as a student of literature, you should understand that poetry has also the aesthetic pleasure. Poetry not only provides you aesthetic pleasure, poetry also teaches you something, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
So you can't totally dismiss poetry as something useless.
Yes.
In imagination.
But if sir, I mean, I'm unable to
Ah.
put my interest in poetry. So if you can recommend something that if maybe I will read or listen to, and it will gain my trust and interest in poetry.
No, poetry. Look, literature for that matter has 2 aspects. One is it gives pleasure, it also teaches us some morality. Okay. Say, for example, don't you learn something from the poetry of Wordsworth,
Yes, sir. 100%. Yeah.
from the poetry of, John Donne, poetry of Milton?
Yes, sir.
So there is something to learn. But the thing is, the poet doesn't tell you something directly. He
It's
makes indirect reference and gives you indirect lessons that you have to discover. Okay. So here, Shelley wanted to defend poetry. When Thomas Love Peacock criticized poetry, at that time Shelley made an attempt to defend poetry. He said that poetry you cannot say is useless. Poetry is very useful. And he said that poetry is the earliest expression of human imagination and creativity. Poetry brings about new rays of hope in civilization. If at all your civilization is so vital,
Yes, sir.
if at all your civilization is so very resonant, is so very useful, that is because of poetry. It means poetry has made outstanding contribution to enrich the civilization.
Yes.
Shelley said, poetry is the earliest expression of human imagination and creativity. He said, in primitive times, myths, songs, and stories shaped social order and moral understanding. In the previous times or in the past, there used to be stories, there used to be some poetry. You might remember during independence movement, some singers used to take the harmonium and move from street to street by singing the patriotic songs. What is the relevance of patriotic song? Patriotic song arouses the sense of patriotism in your mind. You become devoted to save your country, to safeguard your country, and remove the
Yes.
British rulers and all that. So that sense of patriotism was forged, was created because
Yes.
of this kind of song. So poetry has a great relevance. There is no doubt.
100%.
Poetry precedes science and philosophy as the foundation of culture. Shelley says, where was your science? In the past, there was no science, there was no philosophy, there was only poetry. So poetry is the earliest form of civilized expression, and it had come before science and before philosophy. So it is the foundation of culture. Poetry laid the foundation of culture in the world. Then Shelley said, poetry springs from imagination. Poetry is based on imagination, which is the source of empathy and moral vision. There used to be empathy. What is empathy? In feeling. Somebody is getting pain. You are able to realize the degree of his pain. So you are coming forward to support him, to help him, provide him some financial help, some food, some assistance. That is called empathy. Poetry springs from the imagination, and imagination is a source of what? It is a source of moral vision. It is a source of empathy. And imagination allows human beings to transcend selfishness and feel compassion. It is imagination which motivates people to behave in a sensible manner, to behave in a decent manner, to execute moral action, to behave in a rational manner. So all these things are possible because of the imagination. He also views poetry as a big moral force, as the greatest moral force. And imagination helps human beings to overcome selfishness and become compassionate. So poetry brings about refinement in human conduct, in human behavior. Poetry teaches us refinement, modesty, etiquette, courtesy. So poetry is a moral and social force. Poetry is an element of civilization. Poetry enriches the civilization. And poetry is always, one should look for getting good things in poetry. It inspires justice liberty, equality, fraternity. So poetry believes in liberty, equality, and fraternity.
Sir, we can't hear you.
So poetry has a wonderful role. Poetry has a great role to play. You can't say that poetry is irrelevant, poetry is redundant, poetry is useless, poetry is meaningless. Rather, you should feel that poetry is the earliest form of human civilization,
Yes.
and it had come to the world before the advent of philosophy or science. Science was not there when poetry was there. So poetry was enriching the imagination of the people. Poetry was, disseminating wisdom among people. Poetry inspires liberty, equality, fraternity, love, sympathy, compassion, devotion, dedication, bonhomie, goodwill, sacrifice, etc. Poetry plays the role of bringing about some kind of awareness among people. Say, for example, Shelley refers to the role of poets during Renaissance and during the French Revolution also in shaping the ideals of freedom and human dignity. Three philosophers were there in French Revolution during French Revolution: Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. Three of them, they brought about a kind of revolution which was very unforeseen, and people never expected that the revolution will be so very effective to overthrow the autocratic king Louis XVI. Shelley also says, in the defense of poetry, he says, science deals with facts, but poetry deals with values, emotions, meaning, modesty, nicety, sobriety, suavity, gentleness. So he says, I don't deny science doesn't deal with anything. Yes, science deals with facts. But why do you forget? If science deals with facts, poetry deals with human values, moral values, ethics, rationality, judgment, judiciousness, sagacity, awareness, modesty, nicety, sobriety, suavity, etiquette, courtesy, and all those things. Science gives us truth, poetry gives us wisdom. So, which is superior?
Poetry. So poetry is superior.
Poetry is superior.
Yes. Mute yourself. Keep your silent. Sorry, back again, sir. I think they removed them.
This is CTF Cyber, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
He left. He left.
No, no, he left. He might come once again. I am talking to the RC Bhubaneswar. What
Sir, I
is
think
going on?
you should ask to
अच्छा
block
ये
it.
कौन दिवे देव ମୁଁ ଆପଣଙ୍କୁ କହିଲି ବାରମ୍ବାର କି ମତେ ଆପଣ why don't you make me co-host ଲାଇଟ୍ କ୍ଲାସ୍ ସରିଲା ବେଳକୁ ଆସିଲା ସେ ଗୋଟେ ମିଷ୍ଟିଭସ୍ ମଙ୍ଗର ସାଇବର କଣ ସାଇବର ସେଫ୍ ନା କଣ ଗୋଟେ ଆସିଲା
ETF cyber, sir. ETF.
କ୍ରିଏସନ ବୋଇଲେ
Sumit, what do you think about this? It's very concerning.
ହସ୍ମେକ୍ସ କ୍ରିଏସନ ନାଇଁ ସେ କିଛି କରୁନି ତ ହସ୍ମେକ୍ସ କ୍ରିଏସନ କରୁନି
So bad.
ନାଇଁ ନାଇଁ ତାଙ୍କୁ କୁହନ୍ତୁ ନାଇଁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ନାଇଁ ସେ କାଲି ଲାଷ୍ଟ ଆଡକୁ ଦେଇଥିଲେ ପୁଣି ଆଜି କଣ କଲେ କଣ ତାଙ୍କର ଅସୁବିଧା କଣ ହଉଛି ମତେ କୋ ହୋଷ୍ଟ କରିଦେଲେ ଏଇଟା ସବୁ କ୍ଲାସରେ ହଉଛି କୁଆଡେ ଶୁଣନ୍ତୁ ପିଲା କହୁଛନ୍ତି ଏଇଟା ଏଇ କ୍ଲାସରେ ନୁହେଁ ସବୁ କ୍ଲାସରେ ହଉଛି MEG 2 MEG 4 ନା ଆଉ କଣ ଯୋଉ କ୍ଲାସ କିନ୍ତୁ ପିଲା କହୁଛନ୍ତି ସବୁ କ୍ଲାସରେ ହଉଛି। ମୁଁ ଜାଣିନି, ସେ ପିଲା ତ କହୁଛନ୍ତି ଯେ ଶୁଣନ୍ତୁ ଯଦି ହଉନି। ହଁ ହଁ ନାଇଁ ମୁଁ ବୁଝିଲି ଯେ ନାଇଁ ସବୁର ପ୍ରୋବ୍ଲେମ ସଲ୍ଭ ହେଇଯିବ, ଆପଣଙ୍କୁ ବି କିଛି ଅସୁବିଧା ହବ ନାହିଁ। ମତେ ୟୁ ମେକ୍ ମି ଦ କୋ-ହୋଷ୍ଟ ପାଣିଗ୍ରାହୀ ବାବୁ ସେୟା କହିଥିଲେ। ନାଇଁ ପାଣିଗ୍ରାହୀ ବାବୁଙ୍କୁ କିଏ କରିବ, କିଏ ସେଟା? ସେ ତାଙ୍କ ଫୋନ ନମ୍ବର ମୋ ପାଖରେ ନାହିଁ, ତାଙ୍କ ଫୋନ ନମ୍ବରରେ ମତେ ହ୍ୱାଟ୍ସଆପରେ ପଠେଇବେ। ପାଣିଗ୍ରାହୀ ବାବୁଙ୍କୁ ମୁଁ କହିଥିଲି ଥରେ, ସେ କହିଲେ ସାର୍ ଆମେ ଆପଣଙ୍କୁ କୋ-ହୋଷ୍ଟ କରିଦେବୁ ତାକି ଆପଣ ସବୁ ରେଗୁଲେଟ କରିପାରିବେ। ମୁଁ କହିଲି ମତେ କୋ-ହୋଷ୍ଟ କରିଦିଅନ୍ତୁ, କୋ-ହୋଷ୍ଟ କରିବାର ଅସୁବିଧା କଣ? ମୁଁ ତ କିଛି ବୁଝିପାରୁନି। ମତେ ସେ ଅରୁଣ ବାବୁ ଇଏଟା ପଠେଇବେ ଟି, ତାଙ୍କ ଇଏଟା କଣ ସେଟା ଫୋନ ନମ୍ବରଟା ହ୍ୱାଟ୍ସଆପରେ ପଠାନ୍ତୁ, ମୁଁ କ୍ଲାସ ନଉଛି। Yeah. So he said poetry has some moral impact, and poetry is a force to enrich the civilization. Poetry is better than science, and it may be superior to science because science deals with facts, poetry deals with wisdom, poetry deals with human values, and science gives us truth, no doubt, but poetry gives us wisdom. Poets unite reason with imagination, and it reveals the hidden beauty and moral order of the world. Poets always bring about a fusion of reason with imagination, emotion with intellect, and they reveal the hidden beauty and the moral order of the world. Poets should be considered not just the entertainers, but the custodians of moral wisdom. They teach morality in an indirect manner. They are the guardians of the society. They are the custodians of morality. They act as unacknowledged legislators of the world, shaping the thought, shaping the ideal, and they shape the society often
Hello, sir.
in a more powerful manner than those of the political leaders. So poetry is definitely very essential to our own society. Poetry can never be considered as something redundant, something useless, something unnecessary. Rather, it is very essential because poetry, along with giving us or providing us entertainment, delight, enjoyment, it also offers us wisdom. It acts as a moral guardian, and it doesn't fail in its attempt to bring about reformation in the society. Poetry is the life force of human progress. Poetry awakens the imagination, it generates compassion, and it guides the civilization towards achieving the higher goals in life. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. It is said, Shelley, while making an attempt to define poetry, he said, "Ki poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the society." Wordsworth defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Shelley defined poetry. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of society. You may acknowledge, may not acknowledge their contribution. They will say something or the other, They are the moral guardians, they are the preceptors, they are the preachers. They ensure human upliftment. Poetry generates awareness. Science deals with facts, but poetry deals with values. This is very important. Shelley said, while going to defend the good aspects of poetry in response to the criticism made by Thomas Love Peacock in his essay, The Four Ages of Poetry, which was published in 1820. Shelley wrote his defense of poetry in 1821. And in 1821, he finished writing defense of poetry, but it could not be published. It was published in 1840, say 19 years after it was completed. And there he made the argument and he dismissed the points raised by Thomas Love Peacock by saying that poetry has made outstanding contributions to enrich the human civilization.
Hello.
And human civilization,
Hello.
yeah,
Hi, sir. Can you tell me, like, who is your favorite poet?
sorry, Yashika? Yes, Yashika? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, sir. I think.
No, Yashika is asking something. Now she fell silent. I don't know why. I think she asked, who is your favorite poet? That is
Yes, sir.
that is immaterial. Who is my favorite poet? If you ask me who is my favorite poet, I would obviously tell you that my favorite poet is T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is my favorite poet because he brought out the realistic elements that are happening after the First World War in his poem The Wasteland. The Wasteland was written in 1922, and the First World War came to an end in 1918. First World War started in 1914 and it ended in 1918.
Yes, sir.
4 years after the end of First World War, The Wasteland was written by T.S. Eliot. And what did he write in The Wasteland? He wrote how the devastations have occurred consequent upon the First World War and how the land or the world has become a wasteland, unproductive land, sterile land. Nothing can grow here. And he also mentioned there that the future of the young men and women is bleak, is dark and gloomy. There he said, how does the wasteland start? April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring the dull roots with spring rain. Then he said, this is a wasteland, this is a dead land, this is a cactus land, there are heaps of broken images. He said, he painted a cynical picture, a pessimistic picture of human civilization, that there is no hope for the civilization. How can the human civilization survive when such a great devastation has been made? A trail of devastation has been left by the First World War. So First World War had a very detrimental effect on human civilization. So how do you say poetry is only based on imagination? No. Poetry is of course based on emotion and imagination, but at the same time, there is also the expression of realism. Because Wordsworth
Sir,
defines,
what is the name of the poet?
T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot. E-L-I-O-T.
Okay, sir.
T.S. Eliot, and the name of the poem is The Westland.
We Westland.
The Westland. The poem was published in the year 1922. First World War came to an end in 1918. And after the First World War ended, there was a trail of devastation, destruction, loss of life. So people were hopeless. People were totally disillusioned. What would happen to our future?
Mm-hmm.
And young men and women, they turned hippies. You know, hippies, hippie culture developed. What is hippie? They grew long hairs, spotted beards, remained unbathed, wore torn and dark, dirty clothes, slept on the pavement, slept under the shade of the tree, smoked ceaselessly, drank wine, alcohol, wanted to destroy their life, thinking that we have no future. So they got frustrated. They got disillusioned. They got disappointed. Life doesn't hold out any promise. If life doesn't hold out any promise, what is the use of this life? Let us destroy this life, ruin this life. So that was the kind of condition that was prevalent soon after the First World War. And the Second World War occurred in 1939 and it came to an end in 1945. And you know how the two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki of Japan, were destroyed with the atom bomb, nuclear bomb. That was the horror of the Holocaust, the nuclear Holocaust. And ever since then, the countries are becoming very conscious to desist from the world wars, because world wars never cause any benefit, never provide any benefit. Rather, they bring
Yes.
about destruction, they bring about disillusionment, they bring about loss of lives and loss of confidence, loss of courage, mental depression. So many problems used to occur.
So, sir, you mean like we should not fight for Kashmir then?
Sumit, Kashmir is different. And if you fight for Kashmir, it is not bringing about a world war.
Mm-hmm.
Sumit, fighting for Kashmir is different. It is between Pakistan and India. And Kashmir is originally the legitimate part of India. There is no doubt. POK. Pakistan occupied Kashmir should be retrieved by India.
No, sir. Kashmir is for Kashmiris, not for India.
No, Kashmir is for Kashmiris, but Kashmir is part of India. Can you deny it? Kashmir is always
No,
the
it's
part of
occupied
India.
by India.
There are stories that the king of Kashmir,
Hari Singh.
he said that Hari
Hari
Singh,
Singh.
he said he wants to be a part of India, but he also cared about his public. So the public was Muslim mostly, and Muslim people, they wanted to be a part of Pakistan. So it was a difficult choice for Hari Singh to choose. Either he will choose for himself or he will choose for his people.
Hari Singh, had he not annexed Kashmir with India, it would have been taken away by Pakistan. Pakistan was about to invade the country. Hari Singh was a Hindu. Hari Singh wanted to be with India. So he came to
But the people
Jawaharlal
were in
Nehru.
Pakistan.
And
He came to Jawaharlal when Pakistan attacked Kashmir.
Pakistan was
but
about to attack and snatch away Kashmir and annex it with Pakistan.
Before that,
But majority of people wanted to be with India.
no, sir. Majority of people were Muslim.
They were Muslims.
Mm.
And do you know,
Mm.
among the Muslims also, some Muslims were very much supportive of India. Abul Kalam Azad, your
He is
Zakir
not
Hussain,
from Kashmir.
so many people. No, they are not from, they may not be from Kashmir, but they being the Muslims, they love India. Muslim
Yes.
doesn't mean that they love Pakistan, not always.
Yeah.
Only Jinnah and other people, they talk about Pakistan. That too, that was created because of Lord Mountbatten.
Yes, sir.
Mountbatten wanted to bring about a rift between Hindus and Muslims.
This is a story from like Indian side, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when
Okay,
some
let's not enter into controversy. It is
when
time is
sometime
off. So
when
we'll
some
stop it here. We'll meet next time. Thank you very much.
okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Hindustan.
चले गए क्या सर?